Hi everyone. Thank you for coming. It's a sellout. Unbelievable. So we want to start by acknowledging that this program is taking place in the unceded territory of Malahat Nation. My name's Nikki Madigan and I'm the curator at the museum. And thanks for coming and supporting this program. Just a reminder that we do film all of these for the historical record, and we put a copy up on our website, so you can always watch a tale after the fact. This is the 6th in a series of 7 that we're doing this summer, featuring speakers from Birkin, Mount Currie, Pemberton, and Squamish, and our theme this year is local art, past and present. So what is art? Art is defined as the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, and includes the various branches of creative activity like painting, music, literature, and dance. Why is art important? Art reflects and informs the culture from which it emerges. Art created reflects a time and a place and the values and beliefs of that place. Art can be considered a mirror that is held up to inspire reflection on what is and what was. Art can communicate thoughts and ideas across generations. In the past, local art wasn't the exception, it was the reality. Communicating and growing beyond local borders was largely impossible. Today, we can communicate with nearly anyone, anywhere. However, it's local art that gives a community meaning and a sense of place. So it remains an important aspect of any community. Art has the ability to share common values and beliefs between different groups of people. This type of communication is important for society. Creativity is a beautiful experience that brings people and communities together, regardless of race, gender, age, or religion. Integrating the arts more fully into our lives enriches each of us because engaging in the arts brings individuals together and it fosters community. Next week is our final presentation, and we're going to feature 3 historic artists from the area, Marjorie Gims, Pat Wilson, and Renee Ronan. Today's program features Linda K. Thompson, a poet inspired by Pemberton. Linda grew up in the Pemberton Valley and has lived for many years in the shadow of the Beaufort Range on Vancouver Island. She tends to pin her poems' puny, homesick characters against both these walloping landscapes. Her poem, Botany for Beginners, was shortlisted for the Malahat Review Far Horizons Prize, and she received Honourable Mention from the Troubadour International Poetry Prize out of London, England, for her poem, Gloria. Linda has a chapbook, 4 Small People in Sturdy Shoes, and her full-length manuscript, Black Bears in the Carrot Field, is making the rounds of publishers. A poet friend says of Linda's writing, her poems manage to combine the twang of the hurtin song with something dark and lyrical. So thank you all for coming, and welcome to Linda.
There's different ways of becoming a poet, I guess. One is to go to school and get a Master of Fine Arts, of which I've heard people that have one call it the Master of Blank Arts. Or another well-written poet said you could also just go get 40 books on poetry, read them all, study, and do workshops with master poets. So that's really what I've done. And also there's kind of 2 kinds of poets. I mean, there's millions of kinds, I suppose. But the main ones are lyrical or narrative. So lyrical would be, spring has sprung, the grass is riz, I wonder where the flowers is, right? But narrative always tells a story. And myself, I can't stop from telling a story. I can't write anything that's about flowers and things like that. So the main way that I've learned to write is by attending what they call retreats. Now in a workshop, all the people that are attending the workshop with you rip into your poem and tell you how you could make it better. I don't think you should name your dead cat in that stanza. And it gets very annoying. At a retreat, the ones that I've attended mostly at Lake Cowichan, and a lot of them with Patrick Lane, who has now passed away. You get an assignment before you go, so you have to show up Thursday, 2 o'clock with your poem written and read it to 20 other fantastic poets. And then you get another assignment at 4 o'clock and you show up the next morning at 9 a.m. having to read to those same poets who everyone is better than you. On the whole, I would say it cost $300 to $500 a poem, if you look at it that way. Some of the great experiences I've had is traveling. And I did that before I don't even know if I'd written a poem. I went to Spain, New Mexico, California, Italy, Hawaii with Clara. Most of my work, though, has been at Lake Cowichan. So I'm going to start with a poem called Dominion Day on the Veranda. Another thing I want to say is, you know when you watch a movie that they made in the place that you know, how confusing it is, because they go from here and then they're in Horseshoe Bay and then they're back somewhere else. You think, that doesn't work. It's kind of what you have to do to write a poem. So you have a little idea and you want to get that in there, but you have to build it all around it. And sometimes to people that know what you're talking about, that doesn't make sense. So you're just going to have to go with it. This poem, I think I remember that the sentence I needed to put in it was the containment of the day. So this is how that got in there. And when I mentioned Hoagland, or the famous poet, he was an American poet who was wonderful. Dominion Day on the Veranda. Hoagland says the sparrows lost a war 1,000 years ago and are condemned forever to wear a dull brown. I am watching the towhee, who must never have lost a war from the looks of his burnt sienna t-shirt and gleaming red eye. I feel a strange urge to see his heart the size of a blueberry. Bossy sister asks why I wear gray in summer. I say, it's the color of the sandbar where Dad taught us how to smoke cedar roots. And there it is, moonscape of trees, heaps of gravel, and his hands, the hunting knife, the perfect root, the perfect draw. 5 tendrils of smoke curling into the river air. Come back to us, Dad. Janet changes the subject. When your morning starts out with a tetanus shot, the containment of the day is lost, she says. And we laugh, but we know she's not thinking of the lady slippers she admired, but the ticks that crawled up her pant leg at that darling little cabin in the woods south of Halifax. The famous poet told us, don't be too attached to sincerity and truth, but I think I will never detach. His ancestors must have been Davy Crockett Wild, Bowie knife between the teeth wild. Ours were brushing lint from their long black hats and memorizing Deuteronomy. Kathleen says, I know she was a great cook, Steve, but she's not coming back from Windsor to cook with frozen cheese. Not for the green of the Sound, not for the Wilson's warbler under the salmonberry bush. And Steve says nothing. So we pass the sugar lumps, the half and half, Elsie's oatmeal clusters. This is an assignment I did for a retreat at Lake Cowichan. I've got a note here. Some names have been changed to protect the innocent. My story begins. My story begins with a Chilcootin horse trader rolling into our yard, pulling a bust-up trailer, and how Mother said she could feel the pinto ponies, their noses on the window bars, humming in their spotted throats. Keep us, keep us. At the graveside, when the ropes break, and Father's walnut coffin slams down into that 6 foot deep, and how I never want to know how his poor dead body is shook from the fall. On the mountain meadow, lit with willow, alpine spruce and fir, clear oxbow pools, and glacier air, sharp as whiskey, and us wild and giddy with it. With the thimble babies that left the house in the night, brothers and sisters that never quite took, but we loved them anyway, like we loved the eggs in the hatcher for the mystery of them. With Roland at the game, sitting on the hood of his '56 Buick, and him walking towards the concession, his shoulders wide and bony, outlined by the yoke of the red and white cowboy shirt his mother had made and was always a bit off kilter, but I didn't say. At the one-room Anglican church, where we wait for no cars coming, then creep into the gloom, stretch out like we're dead, each in our own pew, pray loudly to the ceiling for juicy fruit, O. Henry's, chicken bones, scent ends, a swimming pool in the backyard, and for God not to remember our faces. A few years ago, I was in Rome. It was desperately hot, and I toured the Vatican 2 times in one day. And the clerk at the hotel desk where I bought my tickets on the bus tour said, "Oh dear, people don't usually go 2 times." It was so hot in there. And I think at that time they were choosing a pope, because I remember they showed us where the smoke was going to come up. So I wanted to write something about religion, but do I have any? I don't know. But I started to think about it. And I wrote this one. It's called Spreadsheet for Semi-Miracles. It's true, we were kind of mishmash, a lumpy mix of Presbyterian, Baptist, atheist, and some far-off Catholic phantoms. But we were not without our own odd miracle or two. Mother had a certain touch. She brought a long-gone, red-necked slider named Tony back to life when we finally found him 3 months down the living room heat register. Propped him into some tepid water, and he puffed right up into his old self again, clambering up on his mason jar lid, smacking up celery and dead flies with his bony turtle mouth. And there was No Name, the goldfish. Like St. Francis, Mom had a knack for pet-centered work. It was a teary kerfuffle the morning we found him, floating belly up in his bowl, there on the counter between the Rice Krispies and the cod liver oil. Mom rolled out of bed, yelled at us all to shut up, then sprinkled No Name with a pinch of baking soda. One burp and he was belly down, cruising his castle turrets with cocky, fishy slaloms. And what about the student ministers? God, yes, truly are miracles in the flesh. They came to town in May, after a winter of theological pop quizzes and too much KD, ready to serve and save. Amen. The love of God lighting their ecclesiastical brows, They glowed behind the pulpit like backlit Persian cats. Jan and me, in our dull Keith twin sets and Sunday undies, never felt closer to Jesus. I wasn't thinking much about the Pope when I toured the Vatican last August. Now I can't seem to stop. Watching every news show, filing every detail up here, the blessed Garamellis hunched over, stitching Cossacks since 1798, one bellissimo stitch at a time. Socks of the finest long fibered cotton, warming those holy toes, and the red, blood of the martyrs red shoes, and weapons weight crucifixes, the purple and red, the black and white. My insomnia's been a blessing. Now when I wake at 2 a.m., it's like I have good homework to do. But what do I really want? Haven't I been secretly proud to be an atheist? Well, okay, but for sure an agnostic? I may have lost my mind. I keep wondering how it would feel to wrap my arms around his middle, rest my head on that warm velvet mosetta. Would he take kindly to a has-been Protestant? A woman with so much on her mind. A woman who flirts with sloth, envy, pride, the works. Would he pat my back, murmur, see, in a nicely modulated tone of voice? That would be a kind of miracle, wouldn't it? South on 99. This is in 3 parts. I leave the yard in the August dawn, gun the knocking rambler up the driveway. Only the horses notice, nodding their noses over the twisted planks of the pasture fence. Potato fields stretch from the road to the mountains, a dark ripe green you can almost taste. In a month the tops will be killed, lie burnt and lifeless, ready for digging. 7 miles from farm to town, we rode in back, would close our eyes, chant the route, yell it into the wind, voices of girls who were not afraid. Uncle Robbie's, Rhine Creek, first rock slide, curved by the slough, Miller Creek, Uncle Morgan's double turn, Lundgren's, Taylor's Corner, second rock slide, stop sign in front of the bank, town. By 68, I'm ready to go, work the early shift at the hotel, buy myself Judge Decker's car after he dies, and one October day, the cottonwoods alight, drive south on 99, past the fields, the rivers, oh, those mountains, blackbirds in the green gauge. I don't know then, but the place will follow me, old dog who won't turn back. Some of you may have heard some of these poems before. You probably remember them, but I don't quite remember if I read them here or not. This is called River of Golden Dreams. What do you make of the old man as he plows the field, driving the green tractor his father drove 40 years before? When he stops to move the killdeer nest away from the tractor tire, when he goes to the river for a drink, sees the trout in the pool by the log jam, wonders if he can catch a couple, move them up to Mosquito Lake. I started to think about this poem because I got so irritated with poets that kept putting the moon in their poems, always going on about the moon. So I kind of wrote an anti-moon poem. And it's one of those ones that's a little mixed up. It's the true story I heard from the Kearneys. But I changed Pete Kearney's name to Pete Sillampa. Had a much more musical sound. Pete Sillampa never loved the moon. Ino died first, and Pete lost heart. Spent his last years at the Finnish rest home in South Vancouver. The farm by Punch Creek, two small fields along the road, the gooseberries, the sauna, the green and white house with the steep pitched roof, all sold off to someone from the city. Pete had worked all over, came to our place for digging, tossed 100-pound sacks of spuds all day, ate black bread with linden tea for lunch, told us about the old country, about the war, told us how the Russians marched his village off to a work camp, and when they let them come home, those that were left, the village was gone. He said he and Ino walked together through that night, the moon stepping ahead, always ahead of their shadows, lighting the rags on their shoulders, Ino's shredded kerchief. They came down through the birch and pines by the river. No lights, not a sound. Not a horse or cow or dog. No nightjar, no owl, no whippoorwill. Just chimneys, like the empty bones of a long dead beast, strewn before them, the stink of it everywhere. And the moon, Pete said, the moon. The only part of me, or anyone I know, that is in this poem is only the fact that I somehow have this memory of the women's washroom at the Pemberton Hotel beer parlor. They had like really skinny doors, really skinny plywood doors. So this is just some of these people that live inside of me. I don't know where they come from. But this is called Bobby's View from the Third Stall, or Avoiding an X. It must have been an hour by now. She's read every flyer stapled to the plywood door. Gamblers Anon, AA, STDs, Women's Center, St. David's Christmas Sale. She's read every scribble and curse on the walls. She climbs right up on the seat when she hears the outside door slam. Prays no one looks up and sees her fingers poking over the partition. Two babes are spraying their dews, grabbing a shared smoke, going on about some guy named Tab and his hot car and hot butt, and how he dated Sylvia's cousin who moved to Squamish. And one of them says, I'd give it up to him for a... And the door slams behind them. And she never hears exactly what they would give it up for. She's back down on the toilet again, staring at the floor. She can see the buildup of liquid wax in the corners, how the dirt and hair has been sealed up against the brown rubber molding. She looks away. Yuck. Her mother gave her the hair phobia, always going on about hair in the tub, hair in the sink, nearly fainting if she found one in her food. Oh, Mum. She looks down at her boots. All she got out of the time she wasted with that numbskull Larry Metulsky. The boots were a bonus. Fries. Classic. He forgot them in the closet, likely because he had never opened a closet door in his entire life. Left his stuff in piles on the floor. Dirty, half dirty, where again piles. Never trust a Metulsky, her father said, who had some story from the old days about a dried up cow. Thank God they were small bone, that's all Bobby cared. The boots fit with just a couple Dr. Scholl's inserts. Rhonda will let her know when he hauls his miserable ass up and out of the bar. She hears Mom's voice in her head. Bobby, sweetheart, bloom where you are planted. Here, Mom? Here? I read a poem by a great poet called Matthew Dickman, and the poem was called Notes Passed to My Brother on the Occasion of His Funeral. And I thought, I could have a some sisters like that. It's called Sisters Here and There. My living sister is cooking me dinner. It's the same chicken recipe she's been cooking for 35 years now. It's got something to do with soya sauce and a 450 oven. Sister B is a quasi-vegetarian and allows herself only chicken breast, like the breast had never been part of a real bird. Like maybe it's really a chunk of lumped up tofu. If it was allowed, I'm sure B would FedEx her chicken breasts to be cooked in Area 51 on bomb test weekends. But enough about her. My other sister, the dearly departed one, is sitting on the couch watching Pawn Store Stars and says to me, "Didn't Mum have one of them button accordions?" I can't really answer because I'm the only one who can see Verna today. She does that off and on, switches viewing options. Today she's dressed in an old Fortrell pantsuit. It has a few pulls here and there, but like Mum used to say, perfectly serviceable. Verna's the one got Mum's dirty 30s thrift gene. Still, she has a long death ahead of her, so you can see her point. I worry that the freaky shade of turquoise will reflect in the TV and let them all know she's here again, because it really pisses B off, and she's likely to stomp right out of the house without serving dinner. But we're all good. A bee calls from the kitchen, "Come and get it, losers!" She means me, of course, and also Frank and little Dwayne, who are down the back hall, whooping and hollering, playing darts for cigarettes. I say quiet-like to Verna, "Too bad you can't join us." And Verna, never taking her eyes off a rickety old couple clutching a pair of beaver skin stretching boards, says over her shoulder, "Yeah, tough, eh?" This is the name of the book over there. Oh, the book, you know, it's 5 years old. The price has dropped dramatically by 50% to $5. If you bought one for 10, you can take one. Or you have to show me the receipt, of course. For small people in sturdy shoes. I am somewhat afraid of poems. I do not wish to wrestle belligerent ones into submission, nor do I wish to flood them with Klieg lights to get to the guts. I find it sensible to avoid a poem like that. In fact, I would march myself right out of that cell, and even as the lifers are rattling their stanzas on the bars, I will be looking for an outside door. Bring me a poem of light and shadow, noonday sun, glaciers, aspens that rattle in the 4 o'clock wind. Bring verses filled with meat and potatoes, Chevrolets and tapioca. Write to me about 3-legged races and dear uncle who came to put down the dog. Show me breath rising from a beaver house, the smell of August raked hay. Bring me sisters who remember, bring a Sears catalog, an aerogram from Poland, homesickness. I'm telling you this, there were 4 small people in sturdy shoes, a dog named Bob. They lived in a house bordered with gooseberries and red currants. They slept under wedding ring quilts, beside the potato fields, between the rivers. Write these words. You might wonder about the last 2 lines of this poem, but it's how it started, me thinking about how Dad loved maps, and he would lay them out on the kitchen table. However, that part didn't quite get in, so I'll read you what I do have. For years I tried to explain, well, how he explained the potato to us. Father brought small gifts to us. A pygmy owl from the barn one winter, bats who lost their way in the light, shining golden crab apples from the old tree. You must remember how he held the netted gem in his hand that evening at the kitchen table, explained its perfection, drew his fingers across the russet, dough-colored skin, the low-lying eyes, measured its weight by the heft in his palm. We stood close by his shoulders in that faraway room, and the cherries on the oilcloth gleamed in the electric light. Last week, I set my alarm for 4 a.m., but the blood moon was hidden by clouds and trees, and I had no courage to step across the dark, looking up. If Father were here, I would want to tell him, there's a town in the north called Kitwanga. I wrote this poem I wanted to write about Catherine Summerskill, who died. And I guess poets say, oh, you wrote your way into the poem. So all these other thoughts came to me. Saying goodbye. On August nights, we used to hear the E and N pulling along the bottom of the hill behind Drinkwater, and that low, ragged note rolled up across the brown pastures that once held your father's chalet. My family back on the mainland are sleeping tight beside tall rocks, dreaming about black bears in the carrot field and the Eiffel Tower that has appeared in the middle of the barnyard. Because they are good farmers, even asleep they worry. How will they coax the bears from the field, save the carrots, manage the upkeep on the tower? Cut fields of timothy and alfalfa wait for morning. How will I ever be at home here, afloat on this raucous beefsteak of an island, threatening to tip into the sailor's sea or slip westward under the plate of Wanda Fuca, forever gnashing away under our beds? On a Thursday in the north, my friend died. So far away, even a crow would not choose to make the journey alone across the great Icha and Cadwallader ranges. Up where the lay of the land slopes down to the Fraser Plateau, and mustangs run through Aspen. For the children, graceful, blue-eyed, sorrow drops bone deep. Come to the window. Northern lights are leaping into the whole night sky, wavering sheets of madness, dimming even the great W of Cassiopeia. I think I have 7 more poems, which, that's very deceiving because this one is quite long. I had this poem in a manuscript, like the whole chunk of what you want to make into a book. And I sent it to my good friend to be edited. And I said, well, what about that poem? She said, oh, I thought you put that in there by mistake. Because it's called Notes for Writing a Poem About Trees. Oh. So I wrote it as if I was just making notes to myself, things to remember. Notes for writing a poem about trees. 1. Notes on significant trees of childhood. Describe the old house where we grew up. Mention the outline of dead cedars in the fields to the north, the evergreens that covered the mountains, the trees around the house, how they were so much part of our lives. List the trees. List: weeping willow, birch, linden, elm, Norway spruce, maple, greengage, crabapple, fir, mountain ash. Note to self: describe the feel of bark against our toes, the sweet green, cool shadow, shape of leaves and branches, great round bodies that we knew by heart, each with their own story, roots and branches that reached us back in time. Say how the trees seemed gifts left to us by our grandparents. Question: did we measure just ourselves or the whole of everything against those trees? My sister and I were always on the lookout for a good climber. Branches we could reach from the ground, or a sawhorse, or with a good boost. And then, As a climber will know, an even placement of branches upwards. Our valley was flat. Up a tree was the only way to see to the edge, get a good view of the enemy. Something to keep to yourself. Little sister swinging on the birch with her eyes closed, head thrown back, singing, "I'm dreaming." And I grab the branch and shake it hard and yell, "You'll be dreaming all right." And she drops like a lizard from the branch, knocks her head on the root. Her eyes roll back, whiter than the bark of the birch. It's not a good thing to think you've killed your little sister with a tree. When we moved to our new house up the road from the old place, our parents spent hours deciding which trees they would plant around the new house. They chose the old favorites again and added cedar, apple, aspen, dark-leaf maple, larch, ornamental cherry. They circled the house like security guards. At night, through my window, the rattle of quivering aspen. Remember to tell the story of Joe Antonelli, how he was hauling riprap along the dike and cut down the one and only wild birch on our farm to repair the side rail on his gravel truck. And how because he was a gentle, kind man and your father sweet-tempered, nothing was ever said. Say how maybe Joe saw the tree only as a useful object, but your father saw a light that shone in the northeast field. Note to self, memorize, white birch equals canoe birch, Betula papyrifera, Betula papyrifera, Betula papyrifera. 2. Notes on the old days. Father told us his elder brother Morgan was asked by our grandparents to choose 2 new trees to plant at the driveway to mark the property. Morgan was a quiet, handsome boy. It must have been an honor to be a chooser of trees in that family. Morgan pondered some about trees, I reckon, and declared he wanted something that was green all winter. Note to self, how did they come to Norway spruce? Great Aunt Nell lived in Norway. Maybe this tipped them in favor of that particular evergreen. Or perhaps they perused seed catalogs, as gardeners and plant enthusiasts tend to do through the dismal months of winter. Perhaps they followed the advice of Wilfred R. Rollins and his Modern Guide for Arborists in a Temperate Clime. Do I need to add how trees, and everything really, had to be ordered by mail and shipped 100 miles north on the Pacific Great Eastern? There seems no way to convey the passing of decades, so go ahead and follow with this. 30 years later, the road foreman comes to the kitchen door to tell us, it was our house now, Mom and Dad, my sister and me, to tell us that they will have to bulldoze those very trees to make way for the new road. And Mother cries into a dish towel. The foreman turns his yellow hat in his hands and says, "Ah, now, Mrs. Miller, we'll try then, love, we'll try to move the trees." But we remember, they never looked the same after they were moved. Both died, a slow, dry death, shriveled down to sticks. Norway spruce. How could something called a Norway die? Couldn't such a fine name save a tree? Note to self. Memorize. Picea abies, Picea abies, Picea abies. Dad told us he and his brothers would go with their father in February or early March to hunt for a honey tree, a prize in the palate-deprived world of the isolated pioneer. They would choose a day with a nice warm sun, but still cold enough for a crust, walk along the fields close to the bush, looking for bees on the crust, bees that had been unable to resist the sunshine and flown out recklessly. If they found one bee, then they looked in a circle for another, and then another, followed the path of frozen bees back to the tree. At the bottom of a honey tree, bees, golden, furry bodies scattered on the snow. 3. Notes on trees in movies and songs. Could I fit in something about trees in movies and songs? For example, Tom Dooley. We love that Tom Dooley ended up hanging from a white oak tree. We'd never seen a white oak tree, and yet imagined it plain as day at the top of a hill, a silhouette against the skyline, and poor Tom twisting slowly from side to side, sorry for what he'd done, we hoped, but dead just the same. And the willows, there seemed to be a lot of willows in songs, always weeping, of course. Hang your heart on a weeping willow tree and never, never think of me. Mom told us it was harp, not heart, but we liked our own version. It seemed as if lovers, a word we might sing but never speak, were doing things under willows that we were unsure of. But we did understand the romance of the shady, dappled room beneath a willow. Note to self. Didn't your old friend Valerie tell you she had seen a willow tree really weep? That's what she said. Tears dripping off the leaves. What? Is she crazy? Could it be true? I don't believe it. Call Val. Get her out of bed. Note to self. Memorize for own interest. Peking willow from China plus white willow from Europe equals our weeping willow. Salix cross sepulchralis. I practiced that word. Note to self. Do some more thinking about movies and trees. There were the hanging trees, the trees pioneers shoved under wagon wheels, stuck in mud, the tree in Brooklyn, but this is slim. Might have to cut the movie angle. Notes on Cathedral Grove and fear of falling trees. To be determined, is fear of falling trees a scientifically proven phobia or more of a Northwest thing? Perhaps particular to islanders who drive Highway 4 through to the West Coast and back to the East Coast. Maybe more research needed here. Note to self. Dendrophobia equals fear of trees, without the falling, though it may be implied. Maybe add in here your memories of the time we visited Cathedral Grove all those years ago. Describe how it felt as a child to walk through that dark understory, how we were afraid and giddy at the same time. Ran up to the giants and hugged them, had heard they were called Jesus trees. Mom asked us, please don't shout that out. Our arms were so little and the trees so big. We laid our faces against the bark, heard their insides humming. But now in the 21st century, how to write about those same trees, describe 800 years, 1,000 years, show 250 feet, imagine 20 or 30 feet around. And don't forget how they come down like cold cock drunks in the wind and rain and snow. How we know what's going out there when word reaches us, they've closed the grove. Tree danger, be afraid. Perhaps follow with these 3 sad examples. Summer tourists driving the brand new Audi station wagon through the grove to the beach, and an 80-ton tree cracks down across the engine of the car, pinning them by the ankles. And they live to tell the tale. But nervous, I would think, forevermore. They may have moved to the prairies. Tourists from Alberta. Tourists from Alberta who pulled off into the car park in their white Alberta pickup to sit out a fierce rainstorm, turned the interior light on to look at the map again, and it was their last moment. The tree came down across the cab, and they were lost forever. Maybe saddest of all, the guy from your English 108 class who climbed into his red Chevy Bel Air and drove to the parking lot in the Grove, stuck meatloaf in the tape player, turned back towards home and floored it, hit the tree on the 3rd curve head on, going 80 or 90, managed at last to quiet the voices in his head. Notes, number 5, notes on family experience with trees. Gather info from family re-experience with trees. Keep at it, even if they are certain they have never known a tree up close. As you know, this cannot be true. For example, you ask Don what he remembers about trees, and he says, nothing. Well, only that he always fell out of them and broke his arm 3 times. He named the cherry in the front yard and the firs that make the fence between the Thompsons and their neighbors down on Alexandria Street as the offenders. Repeatedly breaking the same bones, falling from the same trees, seems significant. Remember back home on the farm how Klaus did us a favor and came and trimmed the apple tree at the gate while we were away. And we came back to a hacked and naked tree with no resemblance to its former self. And Mum cried again. Poor Mum. She was from south of Moose Jaw, you see. Treeless childhood, tree deprived, tree orphan. It can make a person emotional. Notes on the old place. Note to self. Maybe wrap it up here with these final thoughts about the old Miller place. All the trees from the old place are gone now. The last one to go was the crabapple. I always thought to come and take a clipping of that tree, see if I could graft it and grow it new again. It was old and scabby with branches going off in all directions, and yet, right to the end, it still had perfect apples, small, yellow-pink, tart. All those years, my eyes missed that ragged outline. Do I want to add, in winter we would eat those apples for dessert, hold them by the stem and dip them into sweet, clove-flavored syrup. And this, my sister remembers black bears up that tree, munching away on crab apples, pooping right down through the branches, barely chewed, half-digested, pinky mush. Back to the elms. I only drive by now, see them from the road. I said all the trees are gone, but in my arboreal grief, I miss two. The elms have survived all this time. 100 years now. One at the edge of the woodshed, the other 100 yards to the north, and an acre yard that surrounded the old house. Fences and pens have moved around them in the last 100 years. They've been shade for chickens and turkeys, duck ponds, pig pens, goats, sheep pastures, and horse paddocks. Note to self, important. Do not mention DED, Dutch elm disease, or elm bark beetle, or question how those trees have managed to survive when most of the elms in the whole world have died from DED. Too chancy. This is just a poem. Don't tempt fate. Maybe leave those elms out altogether. Note to self. If reading aloud, maintain a chanting tone for the following. Umas, omasia. Umas, omasia. Umas, omasia. How are you doing? You okay? Good. Okay, so our daughter Kate moved to Windsor, Ontario. I had never been there. I had no idea what it was like. But every person that ever had been there that I mentioned it to, they would say, "Oh, Windsor?" Every person said, "Windsor?" So I thought, well, maybe I have to write about it. So we did research. I looked up everything I could find on Windsor, and I had so much stuff. And I said to my friend at a poetry retreat, I've done all this research, and I don't even know what to do with it all now. And she said, just make it all up. Oh, I can do that. Go on to Windsor. And they say, Windsor? As if they're saying gout or hairball, as if she's off to Spuzzum or Cayucot or Surrey, BC. And she says, hey, it's a nice Canadian town nestled between the lakes alongside the river, neighboring one of America's greatest has-been cities. And she doesn't stop there. She goes on about the bridge and how every American citizen cruising across for a Sunday picnic, kids leaping against the windows because Uncle Ron told them they'll see polar bears and giraffes and Canadian chickens break dancing along the ditches. How they're all welcomed by private citizens, smiling and doing their voluntary one day a week duty for international peace. and thrilled to bits to be giving out little bottles of maple syrup, beaver stickers, and a Hudson's Bay striped pot holder. And they claim it's done a world of good to stave off the unfortunate twitchiness of some of the gun-toting Republicans camped across the river. And oh my, yes, encourages the Democrats once again to set in motion their immigration applications. And she could go on, and she does, because they need to know that the streets of Windsor are lined with apple trees planted by Papa Francois, agriculturist and dedicated fruit farmer. And all the bright school children are bussed along the avenues every fall and boosted up into the branches to pick the Gravensteins and Northern Spies. And like little troopers, they don't come down until their Hello Kitty backpacks are full. And then it's off to the care home to bake pie and apple butter. If it's not one of the days, the old folks are given free passes on public transit and escorted by retired go-go dancers and out-of-work auto workers down to the drugstore for creams and lotions and aspirin. And then around to the Hiram Walker plant for the free weekly 500 ml of Canadian Club. And really, they hardly need the escort, as it's the safest city in BC and proud as a group of Canadians can be, to have been written up in national newspapers for its odd lack of homicides. And do they know the Chrysler plant gives out minivans to cheerful citizens who swear to use those white decals on the back window? Dad, Mom, 1, 2, 3, dog. And every time you fill up at the gas station, they give you a 6-pack of Laura Secord soft centers and a yellow smiley face to stick on your bumper that says, "Windsor, gotta love it," in Comic Sans font. And yes, it may be called the smog capital of Canada by the Weather Network, and there may be more tornadoes and waterspouts, more days of lightning and haze and 86-degree weather than the entire rest of the country. But they make sure their fog lights are working, the storm cellar is stocked, the generator is gassed up, and heck, Bob's your uncle. Because who doesn't want to live in a place called the City of Roses, with its very own officially designated rose called Love's Magic? And you heard it here. Every single visitor receives fresh baked lemon loaf and 1 free rainbow tattoo. Oh yeah. Dawn and I had a friend that lived in Port Alberni from Saskatchewan. He couldn't seem to make a living here, and he didn't live high off the hog. He lived in his VW van. I remember he had an old milk jug, a plastic one that he came in to get water. He was a sweet guy. So he made a change in his life. This is Kirk. In Ellsbury, Saskatchewan, you can buy a house on Visa. So Kirk maxed his card and moved out last year. He bought one house and then another. He uses number 2 for his BC bud crop. He's thinking of picking up the hotel next spring. It's just a faded 2-story with a retro neon sign out front. Way out the highway, you can see the letters flashing. Hot, hot, hot. The bar is down a couple steps and dark like a basement. Every wall is filled with shelves of knickknacks, all elephants. When tourists wander in from the highway, it takes a minute or 2 for their eyes to adjust. Kirk says he has no plans to clear the place out once he makes the deal. He says he rode an elephant or 2 in Bangladesh, and he tips the chair and rests his feet on his own porch railing. It's called Long Haul, H-A-U-L, Long Haul. No journey is easy, and she might have made it this far, dragging that old stone boat, stacked with diet books, a grocery bag with stretchy pants, her supplements in a Ziploc, rattling like baby teeth. And still some nights she dreams of the faller in his corks and chopped off red straps, the slope of his shoulder, but she could not disguise her allergy to evergreen. So after that summer and then the next, she threw in with a blonde ex-army with a good laugh, an ID bracelet stamped with his sin, 200 acres, 15 heifers, and an 8x40 Airstream on blocks. And from there it seemed a clear shot through, and might have been, except that a few years on, the everyday and the not-so-everyday began to balloon like a 100-year curse. Fire, drought, rain, snow, mortgage, taxes, interest rates, bad decisions, bad joints, no good mornings, no honeys, no sweethearts, good dogs run off, roofs blown off, price of gas, price of beef, frozen shoulders, lymphoma, the D of ag, dried up wells, dried up milkers, busted tie rods, timing belts, bearings, crankshafts, rust, bent pins, tainted sand points, mildewed windrows, broken windows, fences down, trees down, no tea in bed, no darling, well, let's take the evening off. Weed inspector, potato inspector, nutty neighbors, millennium crews, wild streak heifers, fat horse, sewer lines, broken limbs, founders, colic, brucellosis, everything they could not name, and blackleg, bloat, wireworm, silver scurf, nematode, fear of blight, all drained into the hollow between them. And here she is, hoofing it south, her stuff in a boat that will never float, 17 black journals, and a pencil behind her ear. Did I read Buffalo and Yellowstone here before?
I didn't hear it.
Okay. Buffalo and Yellowstone. Because Bob was driving, I was taking photos of the buffalo along the highway through Yellowstone. Bob, who has a keener eye than me, was shouting things like, "Jesus, there's a big one!" And all I had to do was stick the cell phone out the window. I had lots of time to think about old boyfriends, which I do now and then, when I'm feeling life is less than I had expected. Some trailed behind me, for years it seemed, like a pack train of scurvy donkeys who could not figure out they were never getting any treats on this trail. I do like Buffalo. Once in Vancouver, Mum and I went to the premiere of How the West Was Won at the Orpheum, and at intermission sent a postcard off to Grandpa Harry like we were movie stars ourselves. In the big stampede scene, you would have sworn those animals were going to knock the popcorn right out of our teeth, thanks to the new Cinerama screen. To think of things I did to look good for boyfriends. My pillows and sheets stained with henna, my scalp pierced all night by killer brush rollers, my teeth chipped and savaged by bobby pins, my lungs coated with gallons of Aquanet, my eyesight and neck muscles compromised by sewing pedal pushers and madras blouses into the night. Dippity-doo, cover girl, my doll, 'cause Sally's blue. Oh, and the thievery that was forced on me by having to steal razors from Dad, because no one knew I was shaving limbs with the agility of an Aussie sheep farmer. The real buffalo mostly ignored the tourists rolling their rigs through Yellowstone. We thought we might have seen a big bull, you know, feeling frisky, but it was happening across the grassy river under the pines. And there were 300 visitors dressed in khaki nylon pants with foot-long lenses scrambling over one another with no thought of death by trample. Sometimes, just between you and me, I Google a boyfriend or two, check the obits. I don't. Dingbat worked for the PGE and had a yellow VW Bug. Picture this, second date. Madame Tussauds in Gastown, the torture chamber exhibit. Just by Jack the Ripper, some guy is waiting in the dark to scare visitors. When he steps out from the shadows, we scream like hyenas and try to run. I get knocked down in the melee. I grab Dingbat's bell bottom, and he keeps screaming and kicking at me with his miserable cowboy boot. But I got him in a death grip, and he drags me right across the floor. We're all the way past the medieval rack before he calms down. My white fortrells take a beating. What do you know about buffalo? I'm pretty limited myself, but aren't they just scrumptious monsters? That big hump and how their heads hang down close to the grass, which is really handy for them. In How the West Was Won, Eve Prescott settled on the bank of the Ohio, which is as far as the raft took them after the big rapids nearly killed the whole family. When Linus paddles up in his birch bark canoe, Eve says to him, "Linus, I'm staying right here beside Ma and Pa." Ma and Pa offering no advice from their freshly dug graves. So right there, on the very edge of that dang old river, Linus promises to love Eve forever. It was beautiful. Okay, last one. And the light already turning. I worry about Father, do not know which way his body faces in the grave. Does he look out to the Ryan or south to Mount Currie? On the farm, only one birch, far out towards the river, shone like the edge of a galaxy. I am tired, and I will not write here about love. Father and his brothers ate honey from the hives in the fall, ate till they fell into the shade of the woodshed, dizzy. Do you remember the sound of Mother's voice? How she sang herself through Father's death. I am looking more like Mother. Still, I see the green of the fields stretching to the rivers and south to Ericsson's line, the smell of vines as thick as syrup. I am no longer there to see the evening sun across those fields. It's here inside me, a light of girlhood, of things to come. Thank you so much.